Hello, and welcome to Trade Talks, our quarterly discussion on all things and issues surrounding international trade. I'm Tom O'Brien with the Center for International Trade and Transportation at California State University, Long Beach. And I'm pleased to be joined today by Patricia Elliott, the Consul and Senior Trade Commissioner, and Gavin Nardocchio-Jones, the Consul for Political and Public Affairs at the Consulate General of Canada in Los Angeles. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
Today we're going to explore the relationship between the U.S. and Canada, both from a trade perspective, but also from a broader perspective as well, because this is an important relationship. But I thought I'd start with a little bit of discussion about the diplomatic corps, since you both represent that. Talk a little bit, if you could, about what you do, the role that you play, and as a preamble to what we want to discuss today. Patricia?
Happy to. So I'm the manager here at the Canadian Consulate in Los Angeles, and I have a team of trade commissioners that work with Canadian companies that are looking to do business in our territory, Southern California, Arizona, and Nevada. And we also work with American companies that are looking for foreign investment up into Canada. So we connect companies on both sides of the borders with business opportunities. I've been in LA now for about 2 years. It'll be 2 years next week. And I came in from Calgary before that, where I was responsible for 3 provinces and a territory up north, and working with Canadian companies at that point, getting them ready to come down to markets such as California.
Great. Well, happy anniversary.
Thank you.
Your time in Los Angeles. It's a good place to land, I imagine.
It is a wonderful place to be for 4 years.
That's great. Gavin, what about the role that you play at the Consul?
Thanks, Tom. Well, I'm the manager for the FPDS, or Foreign Policy and Diplomacy Service of the Consulate. Our role is mainly advocacy and network building. Our focus is on areas such as economy and trade policy, environment and energy, security and borders, and values and brand. Values and brand being more cultural relations and public affairs. Small team of 4, including plus myself. I've been here since September. My previous postings include Senegal, Dakar in West Africa, and London in the UK, where I fulfilled similar roles in the political and public affairs sphere. Our relationship at the office is great. We work hand in hand on a number of files, the international business development side and the political and public affairs teams. But we also have representatives, diplomats who help Canadians in the region. So the consular team, if you lose a passport or get arrested or something, they can help you. We also have representatives from the immigration department that do visas and refugee applications and things like that. And then finally, we have representatives from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the Canada Border Services Agency, so Customs and Federal Police.
So a big operation, right?
It's about 60 people right now, and Los Angeles is the second biggest mission in the U.S. So obviously Washington being the embassy, New York, and following that Los Angeles. So a large group of people.
Patricia, it strikes me that Canada may be the U.S.'s least best-known ally, maybe one that we take for granted, both from a trading perspective, but from other perspectives as well. Could you talk a little bit about the U.S.-Canada relationship from your perspective?
I think sometimes, like you said, we're perhaps the least known because we're so similar. Similar languages, similar values, close borders. But when it comes down to business, every time you go into a market, it is different. When I was working with Canadian companies up in Canada and they would talk about going to the US, it's not one market. Every single part of the US has different connotations, different challenges, different opportunities. But it's a very close relationship. The number, 2/3 of the US states, their biggest export market is Canada. And California, Canada's the second biggest export market. If you're in Canada and you go into the produce section, everything is either from California or from Mexico. So those ties are very, very strong, and they have been for a long time.
And Gavin, I imagine that a lot of those ties are culturally related, right? Not just trade related.
Absolutely, and there, how many how many Hollywood actors and comedians have you realized, oh my gosh, he or she's Canadian? What? Jim Carrey, Mike Myers, Ryan Gosling, Ryan Reynolds. There's a whole debate between which Ryan is better. No, I think that the relations are so intertwined. No two countries have a more entrenched, close, interdependent bilateral relationship than Canada and the US. It's really unique in the world. Agreements like NAFTA, which we'll get into later, but also loads of other security, military, cultural agreements, MOUs signed between the two countries at a federal level, but also states and provinces at a provincial level, municipalities, sister cities programs, the list goes on. And one of our challenges here in LA and Southern California, Arizona, Nevada, the territory that Patricia and I cover, is to tease out those relationships which are so ingrained. Often we don't know that Company X or Organization Y are doing partnerships and work in, say, Tucson. But those things exist all over the place. They don't necessarily need our help, and we don't have to, you know, there's no rule that we have to know about it. But if people come to us and want to expand their network and want to understand the nuances of a territory. I also just wanted to say, if I may, there was a recent poll conducted through Foreign Policy magazine, the online magazine, online and print rather, and it was asking Americans and influencers about their views on Canada, and just some of the things that were teased out of that poll, the results of which have just been released, is, you know, Canada has such a positive impact on the U.S. These are perceptions being written. Climate change and environment is the most significant priority of the relationship. Strong partner on security and defense, a vital trading partner, reliable. These sorts of concepts and feelings. So, you know, we're just happy to be a good neighbor and to have such a strong and stable neighbor as the United States.
And I imagine much of that is driven, Patricia, by the fact that there's not just an exchange of products or ideas, but there's a lot of exchange of people that happens on a daily basis across our shared border. And many people who live in either location or work in either location.
And exactly. I mean, technology has changed in North America how people travel, how people work, how people interchange in terms of their business. And people are traveling a lot more, and businesses expect to be able to have their employees move back and forth. And that's one of the things that we work closely with businesses, you know, in helping them when they're looking at talent, when they're looking at labor mobility, is assisting them to make sure that we keep that border thin, but we keep it secure. As our Consul General likes to say, we want to make sure we let the good people in and we keep the bad people out.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the concept of the thin border? I think that's an interesting point.
There's a few things. I don't know if you've had the chance to travel from Canada back into the US lately.
Yeah.
So we have Preclearance in 8 different cities, and we have 2 more that are going to join. So if I'm traveling from Toronto back to Los Angeles, I go through US Customs in Toronto, and that is run by the US Homeland Security, US Customs. I go through, so it means that when I land in LAX, if I'm a business person, I walk out of that terminal. I'm just walking, I'm not going through the international terminal. I pick up my bag and I leave. So it allows people to flow that much easier into some of the major airports. And again, you're just making it easier for people and goods. And again, when it comes to trucks and cargo and trains, we work very closely on both sides of the borders, where we have customs officials from both sides looking at goods, ensuring that everything is correct, and then they flow through. It just means that things are traveling faster, but still securely.
And this is fairly unique among world nations, right, to have this type of relationship?
Absolutely. And if I could just add that it's not just the flow of goods or people, but ideas and concepts and services that we're allowed to throw, thanks to, you know, not just trade agreements, but thanks to the opportunities given and a currency market and a shared economy, but in North America, that allow these things to blossom. You know, we're sitting here at Cal State Long Beach, CSU Long Beach, and the exchanges between universities and academic institutions are essential for that, and continue to have Canadian studies programs at universities, U.S. students going to study in Canada, and vice versa. The U.S. is the #1 destination foreign destination for Canadian students, and those sorts of exchanges continue to bring us closer together and make for families on cross-border. Your sister-in-law may be Canadian, etc., and you go visit up north. I mean, we're just so connected.
Yeah. I think you mentioned the concept of a North American economy, right? I mean, does that mean that what happens in Washington or Ottawa, matters less than the priorities of the people who are moving across those borders?
We have the negotiations, as many people will know, start tomorrow for NAFTA, the initial negotiations. And I think that's one of the things that when everybody's talking about renegotiating NAFTA, let's make it better. It came into place in 1994. Many things didn't exist in 1994 that exist today. So what can we do to that agreement to continue to build on where we're at, so that people flow easily across the border? So goods, services, technology continue to grow. How can we work together to make what has been a very successful partnership and has grown the economy worldwide in North America? How can we make it better entering into the 21st century?
Yeah. I think if what I'm hearing you're saying is that there's really no nation can be entirely self-sufficient, that you sort of need to look at where those potential partnerships lie. We'll talk about NAFTA in depth in a minute, but wonder, Gavin, if you might talk about some of the other areas where the US and Canada work together closely that may surprise people.
Well, there's a number of examples, but I mean, the partnerships at the official government level are very, very thorough. Cybersecurity, military cooperation, banking regulations, investment regulations, energy security, R&D programs and research, just to name a few. On the security side, I like the example of the so-called Shiprider program. This was instituted in the Great Lakes region where say a criminal was trying to smuggle goods across Lake Erie. Well, if that criminal crossed into the Canadian border and was being pursued by U.S. customs agents, they could not pursue into Canada. And then I had to frantically call and get their Canadian counterparts to pick up the chase. So disjointed, uncoordinated. Mm-hmm. And what has changed with the Shiprider program is that we have dual national agents on the same ship. So that means that no matter where the potential criminal goes, they can pursue and arrest on either side of the border. This is just a very simple example, but one that changes the nature of the relationship and continues to entrench cooperation.
And fairly comforting.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, and following on that, just Gavin mentioned early on when he was talking about our office, we have a member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And back in the spring, as you read in the news, the opioid epidemic is out. It's across the States. It's in Canada. But we've been successful in some parts in Canada in dealing with the issue. And what our representative did is he did a presentation. He brought down some of his colleagues from Canada and did a presentation in our office and invited his counterparts on a municipal, on a state, on a federal level to come in and learn about some of the successes that we've had, some of the ways that we've managed to find to address this issue and share it. And it was, I mean, we had a full
15 plus agencies there, yeah.
So, those are other type of, opportunities or other types of partnerships that we're seeing where we can share the information from what we've learned to help address, something that's as serious as that is.
Let's talk a little bit about trade. We've mentioned it. I think many people would be surprised to find out that Canada and not China or here in Southern California, Mexico, is in fact our largest trading partner. And Gavin, why do you think that's the case?
Well, we're not just the largest, but we're the largest by far. Combined export of goods to China, Japan, and the UK doesn't equal the amount that the US exports to Canada. It's very impressive and quite astonishing, the numbers. 73% of Canada's trade last year was with the United States. It is an interdependent relationship, not one more dependent on the other. That's how we view it, and the numbers play it out in terms of trade deficits. It's a very small trade deficit between Canada and the United States. But I think this goes back historically to Canada as a trading nation. This is a nation where natural resources are plentiful, where education is high as well now, and then over the decades, over the centuries, the importance of trade to Canada has been concretized in the nature of our economy, which is mainly based in small and medium enterprises. Patricia, maybe you wanted to jump off on that?
Exactly. I mean, when we talk about the Trade Commissioner Service, of which I'm a part of, there's 1,000 of us around the world in every embassy, consulate, high commission. But when you're in Canada and you're working with companies as they first start to export, one of the changes you see is they go globally now. But their first foray is usually down into the US. Again, there's that comfort level, same language, proximity. Most people have traveled there, but they're also, you know, they have relationships that they've built over the years, and so they often come down to the US and look for those first opportunities here.
And I imagine much of that has to be driven by the fact that such a large percentage of the Canadian population lives within very close range to the US border.
Within 100 miles.
90% of Canadians live within 100 miles of the US border.
So the success of those small and medium enterprises you talked about really is connected to trade. That makes sense. Can you tell us a little bit more, Patricia, about the nature of trade between our nations? What are we trading?
We are trading, I think we are trading everything. And when you look at it, again, it depends on which market you're looking at. You know, the US and Canada in terms of energy, there's an energy security that is there when you look, whether it's oil and gas. Agriculture, although we import huge amounts of California nuts and avocados and fruit and vegetables. Wine, which, yes, large amounts.
Favorite.
Yes, are large amounts of wine. I think, in fact, Canada is the largest consumer of California wine. That's out there. But again, it will depend on the market. So when I'm talking about Los Angeles companies that I'm looking at or that are coming to us, it can be anything from infrastructure to clean technology to life sciences. You have two very large clusters here in Orange County and down in La Jolla, and we have a large amount of Canadian companies that are doing business. They are doing research. You have tech transfers between universities. A large amount of innovation happening. There's a large interest in the incubators and the accelerators that are happening here. On the information communication technology, what we call ICT, large number of Canadian companies that are in LA and are working, whether it's visual effects or special effects. So it really ranges, but then if you were to move to another market, say such as Denver, you would probably find more oil and gas, more perhaps mining. So again, it depends, but the variety of inquiries that we get really ranges from consumer goods to manufacturing.
And Gavin, I think I was surprised to learn that there's even some joint coordination on the advanced technologies like the Hyperloop, right? I think that's one of the,
the University of Waterloo in Southern Ontario is an incubator and leader in engineering and high-tech research, and has partnered with the Hyperloop group. Patricia, actually, you know more about this than I do.
Well, when Hyperloop launched their challenge, they literally launched it out to the world. And there was a number of different universities that put their projects forward and started working. And I think there was 4 to 5 Canadian universities that made it through the first tranche. But now I think the one that is leading the pack, Waterloo, which is not unexpected if you look at technology and what comes out of that region in Canada. In fact, Silicon Valley scoops up practically all of their co-op students out of the University of Waterloo. Just amazing engineering program there.
That's where BlackBerry was born.
Right.
Other technologies.
So that's where you see something like the University of Waterloo that has gotten down into the smallest of the competitors on that challenge, and is working with Hyperloop to make that initial concept from Elon Musk into how can we make this now a reality. And I had the chance to visit them, I think it was last May, with our Consul General, and comment was, this looks like the Jetsons. But I saw a press release last week that showed prototype and how they're beating all the records. And it's going to become reality.
And I know there's a lot of activity here at the campus in Southern California, downtown Los Angeles. It is exciting. It is exciting. There, maybe less exciting, but also equally important, is all of the intra-company trade that occurs across the border. Gavin, maybe you want to speak to that part of our relationship.
Well, I was actually going to bring it back to your question before about what we trade between ourselves, if that's okay. I actually have some statistics here in front of me from the 2016 list of California export commodities to Canada. It's a fascinating list, and I'll just read the top 5 that are all worth over $100 million a year. Grapes is the number 1 at $233 million worth of exports from California to Canada. Passenger motor vehicles, oils and petroleum bitumen, more bitumen minerals, and road wheels and parts for motor vehicles. Those are all over $100 million in annual exports from California to Canada. And that, as Patricia said, that's not the whole story, but how little people realize in their day-to-day lives the companies that are connected. We make things together, as is often our motto, and nowhere more so than in the auto industry. And I don't want to go too deep into that sector because it is a complex one that I'm not an expert on, but I can tell you that an example is one of, for North America's most popular vehicles, be it a Ford or a Toyota or wherever else, those cars that are manufactured in North America cross our borders at least 6 times. Wow. Even one part of a car, like a driver's seat, with the electronic movements, up and down, the seat belt, etc. All the parts in that come from all of our 3 countries in North America, including Mexico, Canada, and the US, from different companies. One company might make the bolts, one company might make the bit that your seatbelt goes into, the headrest. All sorts of different sourcing and interconnectedness of our supply chains mean that we give quality and value to the consumer, and it helps keep companies' prices down.
You mentioned the coordination on the vessel side, but I imagine for all of that to occur, it's a pretty complex supply chain. There has to be other levels of coordination across the border between our 2 countries. Patricia, is there other ways that would sort of reveal the cooperation that occurs to make sure that those transitions happen smoothly?
I think one of the things that I mentioned earlier on in tech transfer between universities, and that's something that we work quite closely with, is the different universities in Canada. They all have tech transfer offices, and then we will connect here with the same offices. And a lot of times, especially on the life sciences, a university will get to a certain degree in the research for a product. And especially when it comes to life sciences, something that can save lives, that can help progress towards stopping cancer. And they either don't have the means of going that much further, or they're looking for a component that actually can't be done with it. We will connect them in with a university here that is perhaps working towards a similar goal, but has started at another component to it. And we'll connect the 2. And again, it's nothing tangible, except for perhaps research scientists going back and forth across the border. But this technology is going to be able to save lives worldwide. So it's something different than an actual auto part, but can be just as important.
And Gavin, yes.
Yes, I wanted to add, there's a concept and program that Canada, the United States, and Mexico have been working on for a number of years. It's called the single window, and this applies to trucks. And I know we're going back to sort of manufacturing auto parts, but or goods crossing the border. But the concept is, right now, if a ship comes in from Asia, for example, to Prince Rupert in British Columbia or the Port of Vancouver, unloads into its goods into the truck, the goods destined for New Mexico, for example. Well, when that truck leaves the port, it has to go through the Canada-U.S. border, sit in a big line, be inspected by U.S. Customs, et cetera, at the border, and eventually make its way down to Mexico. Or to New Mexico, rather. But the concept of the single window is that when the goods are offloaded, that's when they're inspected. A little bit like pre-clearance for passengers. That's when they're inspected. The truck is sealed, and then the truck will be able to pass through a express lane with a beeper transponder system that would check that the seal on the back of the truck is still closed and go right through the border. This would apply to the Mexican border as well. So in theory, a goods could arrive in Canada, transit through the United States by truck, and be delivered to destination in Mexico without stopping. Obviously for sleep for the driver, apart from that.
And this requires, I assume, the cooperation of not only our governments, but the supply chain partners.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Which makes those relationships that we've talked about even more critical. We're going to be taking a break coming up, but I want, when we get back, to talk a little bit about some of the challenges in this trade relationship. You've both mentioned NAFTA. It's a fairly controversial trade agreement, has been from the beginning, and we're in a time period where both the three parties that are part of the agreement are looking at that relationship, and I want to talk about that when we get back. We'll also tackle other difficult questions. I can't promise that we'll resolve the Ryan Gosling versus Ryan Reynolds debate.
Very complex.
But I look forward to continuing our discussion. So after this brief break, come back, join us for Trade Talks, and we'll explore some of the nuance of the NAFTA trade agreement between Canada and the United States.
The Center for International Trade and Transportation at Cal State Long Beach is celebrating 20 years of education, research, and community engagement in the goods movement industry. Industry partnerships have been a key component of CITT's 20-year history. Educational programs such as the Global Logistics Specialist Certificate were made possible by close connections with industry leaders who desired to participate in curriculum development and instructional activities.
Instructors in the GLS program always have been actively engaged in the trade and transportation industry and passionate about sharing their knowledge and experience with the next generation of logistics professionals. With courses involving legal issues and risk management, we've given students a practical, real-world understanding of the considerations and concerns they are likely to face in the logistics industry. We are happy to be a part of the educational mission of CITT.
Hello, and welcome back to Trade Talks. I'm Tom O'Brien, and my guests today are Patricia Elliott, Consul and Senior Trade Commissioner, and Gavin Nardocchio-Jones, Consul for Political and Public Affairs, both with the Consul General of Canada here in Los Angeles. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Before we broke, we were talking a little bit about the important and unique nature of the relationship, including the trading relationship between the U.S. and Canada. And now I wanted to broach the elephant, or should I say the moose in the room, which is the renegotiation of the NAFTA trade agreements. And I wanted to start maybe before we jump and dive into what is a fairly complex topic. I want to ask you, Gavin, if there's something unique about the approach to trade agreements that Canada has that might be different than what an audience here in the U.S. might expect.
Well, thanks, Tom. And I think there is a uniquely Canadian approach to trade agreements, but I think it starts with the Canada-U.S. bilateral free trade agreement that was actually signed in the early 90s before the NAFTA was negotiated. Little known fact. But at the time, going back in history, it was all these agreements domestically in Canada, at least politically, were very controversial. Canadian companies and politicians thought this would be the end for Canadian independence, that we would be overrun with U.S. companies and U.S. dollars would devalue our currency, and all these fears that happened in the mid 80s and early 90s. 25 years later, although some academic institutions pick at that there's no concrete, specific or sectoral evidence of the positive effects of the NAFTA or other trade agreements, there's no question that our economies have grown, and our trade relationship has grown, and our stability. The NAFTA was the first modern trade agreement in that it really allowed for the mix of economies to happen at a continental and trilateral scale. Mexico was an underdeveloped economy at that time, and the NAFTA allowed it to increase its market share, its manufacturing, but also increase its stability. And some would argue jobs went to Mexico, et cetera. Well, there was also new jobs created in the US or in Canada. So we're growing the pie together. We continue to build things together, and that's our approach to trade agreements. I would just add that the way that we've viewed them more recently, so with the recent signing of the CETA agreement with the European Union, for example, was a 10+ year process. The TPP, which at the moment stands idle, but was a 8 or 9 year Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement with the Asian countries and the North American countries. These are very progressive, very inclusive. They touch on everything from labor, gender, environment. They look at sectors very specifically, and each country that came to that table that grew from the experience of these negotiations, I think has allowed them to look more carefully at how they manage their economies and different sectors.
Patricia, maybe you can bring us back to the inception of NAFTA as a springboard for our discussion. Talk a little bit about why it was formed, why it was necessary, maybe some of the challenges. Unless I'm mistaken, it's the first trilateral trade agreement that include that mix of developed and developing countries. So maybe give us a little bit of background.
Well, when you look at, we were talking about that earlier, Canada is a trading nation. We always have been, we always will be. So when you look back in sort of 1994, that's when it came into play. But even before that, as Gavin mentioned, 1988, the bilateral, there's this recognition that if you lower tariffs, trade increases. And Canada has free trade agreements. I think we have
60+ countries.
60+ countries. And we've seen that when you put that into play, you have more flow of goods, of services, of people. And I think when they were looking at the North America economy, and originally, Canada, the US, bringing in Mexico, is how do we make things better? How do we continue to grow our economy? How do we continue to, I don't even know at that point, they were thought, how do we make things together, because how that has evolved. But I think, there's always make things, better jobs for the middle class, and how can we do that? And looking at a trade agreement where you're raising the tariffs and just enabling that flow across 3 different borders.
Gavin.
Since 1994, just do a little statistical readout here. Since 1994, our combined trading relationship with the 3 countries has grown 4-fold to almost $1 trillion, making the North American economy one of the biggest in the world. And that makes us more competitive on the international market. So all this, rhetoric about whether it's protectionism or the fear of Asian markets or China specifically. Well, the more that we can remain competitive as a region, the more we have, the ability to keep growing, and that's what businesses want to do. They want to keep growing and keep showing profits, and keep hiring more people and keep exporting more goods. And to do that, keeping a tariff-free zone, and there's more to NAFTA than just tariffs. There's a lot of other issues and as I said, sectoral agreements within it. But tariffs is the main thing. If we keep those so-called MFN or most favored nation rates down off of a lot of sectors, that promotes trade between our 3 countries.
I want to talk a little bit about the process before we get into some of the issues and the concerns among industries and residents in all 3 of the nations. But it's not fair to say, right, that this is the first renegotiation of NAFTA. I think that's important. Patricia, this is something that actually happens on a regular basis. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I think we've renegotiated NAFTA 11 times.
11 or 13, I forget.
So, and even our other free trade agreements, you constantly have to bring them into the future with everything that's changing and bring them up to date. So it's not, I don't think it's ever going to be something that stops, whether we would do a whole of renegotiation every year is not going to happen, but we have to keep looking at how things have evolved and how things have changed. And as I mentioned earlier, companies are going global as soon as they start exporting. So when we're looking, how can it make them more competitive? And I think that's one of the advantages they were looking at with NAFTA, is being able to have that flow of ideas, of people, of technology, of goods to go across those borders, made North American companies more competitive, so they could then also, it's not just trading between the three countries, worldwide.
So Gavin, what's different then about the process this time? Is it the scale? Is it what's being driven by politics in our respective capitals?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that even from the summer of 2016, for example, when the North American Leaders Summit took place in Ottawa between Prime Minister Trudeau, President Peña Nieto, and President Obama at the time, we were already in discussions about how to change NAFTA. There was already working groups between federal departments looking at, we referenced it earlier, the movement of people. The TN visa, which is a NAFTA visa for workers, allows companies to move their workers between offices across the region, but also for skilled people who are in specific job sectors to come and work in each other's countries. That list was written in 1994, so it includes things like, rural surveyor, but doesn't include things like computer programmer. So those lists need to be updated, and Canada and Mexico have been lobbying the United States, the USTR, and the Commerce Authority, Trade Representative's Office, and U.S. Commerce. Secretary Wilbur Ross is the current head of that. But we've been lobbying them for years and slowly moving the agenda forward to update that list. That came to a head at NOWS in 2016. Since then, we have, obviously through the presidential campaign, not surprised that we're at this stage now because of the rhetoric used by now President Trump. And our negotiating teams, or trade policy representatives at our various institutions, have been talking for months already. The timing, how that's going to go, who's going to host first, all these sorts of rules, and laying out the ground rules for the negotiation. I believe 7 rounds have been scheduled between now and beginning of December. The first is in Washington tomorrow, August 16th. We're ready. Our process has been about consultation. The current Canadian government, but also written into the NAFTA legislation in Canada, is that we must consult the sectors domestically. That includes private and public, including provincial governments, so our state equivalents, have to be consulted. And Canada has now come to the table with a list of goals that it's going to negotiate for, that were recently announced by our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Chrystia Freeland.
So these 7 rounds of trade agreements, they're completed, trade negotiations, excuse me, through December. What happens then? Can you tell us a little bit about the process moving forward, at least from the Canadian side?
Well, I believe it's 7 rounds every 3 weeks, which almost sounds like a boxing match a little bit. But where we'll be after December will depend on how these negotiations go, how strongly certain parties adhere to the objectives they put forward. I believe the U.S. had close to 100 or a little over 100. Our Minister Freeland, yesterday outlined 10 objectives. Mexico, have they released theirs?
Yeah, theirs is more sort of policy oriented. They don't have specific requests like ours.
So I think unless you're at that negotiation table tomorrow and you start to see things, how long it'll take and how far it'll go, will be, if you need that crystal ball or that to be able to see how that. But like in anything, we have, like Gavin mentioned, we also, the Prime Minister has put forward an economic council in Canada, and he's brought together CEOs of companies. He also has on his negotiating team our former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, who was there when NAFTA originated. But he also has members from the opposition, from another political party that he has brought in there to just get that range of ideas and input into the negotiations as we go forward.
Gavin, you were going to add something.
Yeah, some of the, so we can only speak for the Canadian government, and our role is to get a good and fair deal to continue to see the benefits of NAFTA. But obviously there are political pressures in each of the three countries, and that's going to determine how the U.S., Mexico, and Canada approach these negotiations. Going back to your question of what happens if and when a deal is finalized, a modernization, or maybe everyone's going to throw their papers in the air and said, you know, we'll just leave it as it is, it seems to be doing fine because they couldn't reach an agreement. But if an agreement does come forward, it has to go back to Canada's Parliament, and there has to be a consultation again with stakeholders and the provinces, especially the provincial governments. Once that consultation takes place, the new legislation can be put in front of the House of Commons, then goes through the Senate, and can become law. So it's quite a long process, and that's, I think, the main difference between Canada's position on negotiation and the other two countries is that we're expecting actually quite a lengthy negotiation, a year, maybe 2 years tops, and that's actually quite a quick negotiation in trade agreement terms. You know, you'll read in the press that the U.S. may have goals to finish the negotiation before the 2018 midterms, and which I believe are in March or May, I forget. And
November 2018.
Of 2018, I apologize, sorry. And then the third one, which is what I was thinking about, was the Mexican presidential elections, which are in the spring of 2018, apologies. So there's different goals on each side in terms of the speed of the negotiations, but perhaps I can springboard onto that and just read you some of the objectives that Canada wants to achieve. Are we there yet in the conversation?
Sure, we can do that.
Great. Well, as I said yesterday, August 14th, Minister Freeland, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, who's the lead on the NAFTA file for the Government of Canada, had a number of speeches in which she laid out the 10 priority areas for Canada during this renegotiation, or this modernization as it's also being called. The first is a new chapter on labor standards. So in the previous iteration, there was not one of these, but it was there was an addendum to the original agreement once President Clinton came in afterwards. And it's not, in Canada's view, fully fleshed out, and it could be more modern. Similarly, environmental standards, there was again an addendum made to it during President Clinton's presidency, but again, needs to be modernized in Canada's view. A new chapter on gender rights and Indigenous rights is also being asked for by Canada. And a controversial area is procurement. Canada also wants to expand the procurement laws for governments within the NAFTA. Currently, there's a lot of Buy America legislation, for example, which makes for local state and federal governments to procure from American companies and or for goods that are deemed to be American or Buy American. Those rules need to be fleshed out according to Canada.
I want to explore that a little bit further, because I think one of the challenges you'll hear on the U.S. side, and I imagine it's the same on the Canadian side, is that NAFTA on balance, improving trade across the three countries, but it doesn't eliminate the fact that there are winners and losers in particular sectors. So you mentioned the procurement. I'm curious if that was an issue in Canada as well, if that's still the perception. And is that something that you'll address through the process of consultation? Patricia, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
In terms of the question, so the winners and losers,
yeah.
I think if you look at our Prime Minister or even Minister Freeland, when they're talking about it, they are looking at this opportunity to modernize it, to create and improve those jobs that were lost to technology. When we talk about it, people talk about trade as perhaps the enemy, and many people have said the enemy is not trade, the enemy was technology, automation. So how do we take advantage of these negotiations to look at all of these new technologies, how they've changed manufacturing? How do we train those employees, or how to retrain in the case of those that are there, but how do we look to educational institutions to what do we need to change in order to bring those students, those people coming into the workforce, so that you don't have the manufacturing industry that feels that all of these jobs have been lost because of trade, because of a NAFTA negotiation or a NAFTA trade agreement. So I think that's what they're looking for. Let's take advantage of this negotiation, and how can we look forward and change perhaps the way we train people, the way schools offer programs, so that we address the 21st century and the 22nd century going forward. So we don't have this gap that happens.
Right. On the procurement issue, I would say that neither, as far as I know, the Mexican, but definitely not the Canadian government, does not have rules like the American has, or the US has, for government procurement. There's no law in Canada which says we must buy Canadian when building a new government building, whether it's the steel that goes into the girders, whether it's the windows, that noise canceling windows, whatever it is. There's no rules like that. So Canada is seeking reciprocity in a lot of these requests, which also include, for example, the reforms to, but also the maintaining of the dispute processes within NAFTA, Chapter 11 and Chapter 19. Chapter 19, the most important, which allows for a NAFTA tribunal on trade disputes, on irritants, as they're so called. We mentioned already the free movement of professionals, and that's a list we've been wanting to update for a while. But we also have laid out, priorities to protect certain sectors that were already protected in the original NAFTA, such as in Canada, dairy and poultry, which, if not protected, are already under massive trade deficits with U.S. imports, and also cultural exemptions, which is a tricky one, but one that we are determined to protect our Canadian identity, Canadian TV, music, radio content. There's certain laws in Canada that make, for example, that TV and radio have to play 30% Canadian-made content. Well, we want that law to be able to stand in order to make sure that the Goslings and Reynolds of this world stay on our TVs.
And are these negotiated all at the same time? Are they sort of attacked individually so that the process doesn't break apart because of one component?
You have different teams. I've never been on a trade policy or trade negotiation, but I've watched many a colleague go through it and get considerably older doing it. But my understanding is you have different teams that have specialities in specific sectors, because they need to be able to sit down and be able to go into the weeds. So you'll have a number of different tables or different rooms that will be looking at procurement, that will be looking at supply management, that will be looking at Chapter 16. So, how do we get those people over the border? And it's interesting because we see a lot of associations. 90% of the technological companies in both US and Canada have said we need to be able to move our people freely back and forth, and look at TPP, look what we negotiated, even though that's defunct at the moment. There was a lot of work, really good work that was done, so let's look at that work and use it. Our Minister Office, Minister Freeland, talks about the CETA, the European Trade Agreement with Canada, as the gold standard. So if we have some really good examples, let's use them. Let's not reinvent the wheel, of course modified to what NAFTA is, but that's how they'll go about it, and eventually all these tables will come together. But at the moment, they will be branching out and doing their own separate negotiations.
Gavin, you mentioned sort of a list of really complex issues: labor, technology, automation, the environment, which is, I know, a big issue here in the US as well. Thinking about Brexit, thinking about some of the other events or movements that we've seen around the world, I'm wondering if either or both of you have any thoughts on whether this sort of recent bout of protectionism is something that's a short-term phenomenon, or is this a longer-term trend that has a lot to do with some serious disruptions driven by advanced technology and what it means for our labor forces in our various countries?
Well, I think that, thanks, Patricia. I think that, and I'm not an expert in global economics, but the argument that I've read specifically talks about the growing disparity between rich and poor globally. And that may be the case in several regions of the world, including the North American one. But I think the most important thing to remember, as I've said before, is that stability, prosperity has grown in our region and continues to grow. If it stagnates or stops, or the price of goods increases, or the trade between countries decreases, we lose quality of life. We lose stability, which can lead to insecurity. So having a stable and prosperous Mexico, having a stable and friendly Canada on each side of the United States' borders is a positive thing. Why do we want that to change? 9 million US jobs depend on trade with Canada. 9 million, that's a big number. And if there's disruption in the trade between those countries, it creates problems domestically as well. So our argument is absolutely we're ready to modernize and to update agreements, but at the very least we just keep things the way they are. We and I think a lot of countries around the world are happy with the way that globalization has taken place, and that global trade continues to be a positive force for good and development, especially in less developed places, but also in the Western world. I would say as well, while 9 million jobs in the US depend on trade with Canada, 1.1 million jobs in California, where we are now, depend on that trade. So it's not insignificant for here locally as well.
Right, I think you raise a good point, and Patricia, maybe you have some thoughts about this, that it's helpful to look at the trade that occurs between places like California and Canada, or even where we're sitting in greater Los Angeles in Canada, to get a much better understanding of the complexity of this trade relationship.
It is, and it's, when you were talking about earlier about Brexit and other, so that wave of protectionism, what I found interesting is following Brexit, following the elections here in the US, when you saw the elections in Holland, and then you saw the elections in France, there was a shift back in terms of who was brought to power in those two countries. And I think there is a realization, as Gavin was mentioning, you want the certainty of knowing that your lifestyle is going to continue, and businesses don't like uncertainty. Yes. And I think no matter who is the leader of your country, they hear it loud and clear from businesses. Don't put obstacles in our place that are going to stop us from earning a profit, but more importantly, in creating jobs and the people that we have employed. So, you're looking at all of these people that are working within this trilateral agreement, and the companies that are coming forward and saying, sure, let's make it better. Absolutely, and most of them coming forward, and there is that opportunity for change. But, don't stop trade. It can't, that's what pays the taxes also.
Too often I think the media, politicians, etc., make a mountain out of a molehill, in that there are irritants to trade. We've heard it in tweets recently: lumber, dairy, poultry is going to come up, as I said, in the supply management field in the negotiations. But these are small aspects of a far bigger relationship, and I think that's important not to lose sight. We mentioned it off the top. The relationship between our two countries is unique in the world. It's one of the most prosperous, one of the friendliest, one of the most connected in the world. And just because there's a few sectors, and I don't have the statistics in front of me, but softwood is a very important sector and one that we will fight to protect. But in the grand scheme of things, it perhaps isn't the biggest sector that our two countries trade. Same with dairy. It's very important locally to U.S. and Canadian politicians who represent constituents who produce dairy products, but in the grand scheme of things, they're very small in the numbers aspects of a far bigger and more important relationship. So too often I think we get bogged down in the little things and need to step back and look at the big picture.
But you recognize the concern and the vulnerability that certain sectors feel,
Sure.
right? What would you say to them to make them perhaps more comfortable with the potential outcomes of a renegotiated trade agreement?
Speak up. We've been a number of consultations, as Gavin was mentioned, across the country, across different sectors. And it's not a secret. You've seen a number of Canadian ministers coming across the border and talking to senators, to Congress, and to other people to talk about the importance of the trade in their particular state with Canada, and urging them to come forward, and the companies, to understand. So educate yourself about the impact of, and then come forward with, what are your ideas to make this better? It was interesting, our minister yesterday in one of her speeches, she equated NAFTA with it's going to be like renovations in the house and you're staying in the house while it's done. It's not going to be easy, and you're going to find, you know, pipes that you didn't want to find or other things, but she was confident that there is going to be a happy ending. But I think, you know, there are going to be some bumps along the road, but I would say to anybody, if you have concerns, if you have ideas, bring them forward. And this is the time when we're going through this to be able to put your ideas forward.
Amazingly, our time is come to an end. It's been a fascinating discussion. I'd like to ask each of you just to briefly close with what message would you have about to a U.S. audience about this relationship between our two great nations? Gavin, I'll start with you.
One of our relationship, I think, is the continuation of the prosperity, stability, and close contact that we have as two partner countries, you know, friends, partners, allies, as the folder I gave you suggests. But also that we want to continue to build the relationship, continue to change it, continue to adjust to political, economic pressures, and to finish on the NAFTA, we want to make it a win-win-win scenario. That's our ultimate goal. There are no, in international trade, there are no winners and losers. It's not a zero-sum game. If the pie continues to grow, we grow that pie together.
And Patricia?
I think in what we're looking at is progressive trade, a progressive deal that will come forward. And I work one-on-one with companies every single day, whether they're American companies or they're Canadian companies. And I'm actually quite excited to see what will come out of this. What does a renegotiated NAFTA do? And then what opportunities does that provide for Mexican, US, or Canadian companies to prosper? So from my perspective, I'm very much looking forward to see what will come out of this, what will be on the table, and then how do we use it to make even a better trilateral economy here.
Well, thank you. It's been a fascinating discussion. I've learned a lot. I know our audience has as well. Thank you again to Gavin Nardocchio-Jones and Patricia Elliott of the Canadian Consulate here in Los Angeles. This has been Trade Talks. I'm Tom O'Brien. Please join us around the negotiating table for our next episode. Thank you.